Okay, good morning, Shavua Tov, and Kites Bari. I hope that we all enjoyed a wonderful Pesach, each one of us wherever he had been. And it's also wonderful to return. So I'm happy. And also because the yeshiva only begins at the end of this week. So for me, it's really the first, it's the first shiur after Pesach, the formal shiur. Obviously learning with people and the drashot. But a formal shiur is the first after Pesach, so I am excited and thrilled. Thank you so much.
We are proud.
Okay, thank you. And we want to speak today about a very interesting and important personality, that is Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger. Now, Yaacov Ettlinger is a more modern way to pronounce his name. He, especially in his youth, he would sign as Yaacov, that is Yud Vav Kuf Bet, Yaacov. And not Yaacov, but for us, I guess it'd be easier, at least for me. I have to speak in this year, so it would be according to my pronunciation. I will call him Yaacov Ettlinger. And he is very special because he may be seen and is seen by some, meaning some of the articles I read about him, is seen as the last of his kind, right? The last Mohican, the last one of the old version of the Gaonim of Ashkenazi. Now, when I mean here Ashkenazi, I consider myself as Ashkenazi, but to be honest, my parents are from Romania and Hungary. The real Ashkenazim, they don't see the people from Eastern Europe as Ashkenazi. They are just the riffraff. Right, so the real Ashkenazim are the one to be born either in northern France or in Germany, per se. I think that some of the people in Holland can somehow also pass, but that is basically, that's the real Ashkenaz. And Rav Yaacov Attlinger can be seen, I think, and should be seen as the last of the rabbis of Ashkenazi heritage that is a Gaon in Talmud. After him, his students, who are his main students in Ashkenaz, this would be Rabbi Azriel Ilzheimer and Rabbi Shimshon Raphaelius. Obviously, both of them were special, Talmidei Chachamim and Gaonim, and nothing chas v'chelek that I am saying now is to take from their honor and from their importance. But they are very modern in any understanding of the term. Just look at their pictures. So they are very modern. And Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger is a transitional figure because he begins in, and his roots are in the very old and traditional world, but as his life are moving on and as the events around him are happening, I think that he has no choice. It's not from his own volition, it's not out from his own will, but he has no other alternative but to adapt. If he wants to still be relevant to his community, he must adapt and change and update his course, we may say. And although he is a bitter fighter, as we will see, he's a bitter fighter against reform. We are not speaking about someone that is pashran, right? That is in some way is lukewarm. We're speaking about the real deal. But nonetheless, he understands that you must make some differentiation between the content and the tools. Now, we know that in some ways, the media is the message, right? So you cannot always separate between the tools you use, the means you use, and the contents you give. You cannot give an Iyun shiur in an MTV clip style version, right? So the media you use is affecting the content. But nonetheless, sometimes you must make some, as I said, adaptations, and he is beginning with them. His students that I mentioned earlier obviously would make much more major steps in that direction, but he can be seen as the father of the modern Ashkenazic rabbinate in many ways. So he is a very important and foundational figure. And while being so important in the historical field, his sefarim are being learned to this day in all types of yeshivot. I mean, not only in modern yeshivot, but also in yeshivot that see the word modern as an insult. I think that everyone is modern, but they see the word modern as an insult. They would learn his sefarim. He's well known. His pirushim on the Shas, his tshuvot, his responsa. All of them are learned and are being utilized to this day in commentary and in halacha. So a very important figure, Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger. He was born in 1798 in a place which there is no way to be able to pronounce, Karlsruhe, or something like that. His father, Rabbi Aaron, was a Rav of a shul. That's obviously the most important position in Jewish life, as we all know. So I'm joking if it was not understood. So he was born, but his rabbi was a real Talmid Chacham, not only a Rebbe of a shul. He was a real Talmid Chacham. So he learned by his father. No less important, he learned by maybe the most two important rabbis of that generation in Ashkenazi. I guess that no one here ever heard about them, but one is Rabbi Asher Wellerstein. He was the son-in-law the son, not the son-in-law, the son of the Shagasari that you may have heard about, an extremely important posek. So that's one of his rabbis, and the other was again a name that is completely unknown today, but Rabbi Avraham Bing. There is a certain institution that is called the Machon LeMoreshet Ashkenaz, which are engaged in publishing unknown chidushim from this type of forgotten Ashkenazi rabbis. So they put his chidushim to print of Rabbi Avraham Bing, I guess 20 years ago. I'm not sure that made him famous, but at least now, if you want, you can learn about him. So again, he was a very important rabbi at the time, and he learned by these two, and so he's a heavy-duty learner. Okay, we are speaking about someone that can punch, and that is Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger. He's being married when he's about 25. He's married to Gendel Varmeser, and his father-in-law is supporting him during the following years. He would have 8 children from Gendel. She would unfortunately die soon after the birth of the 8th child. That was a girl named Sarah. And just to fill in the personal details, he would go on to marry Batsheva, the daughter of Rav Meir from Würzburg, and another 3 children would be from her. So in total, 11 children surviving. As we all know, back then you could have 15 children, but some of them would not survive. But we had 11 children that survived. And I would speak about his legacy, but Hashem, then we'll speak also a little about his offspring. Okay. He's learning in Würzburg, as I said. He's learning in Würzburg. In Würzburg, there were 2 important yeshivot left in Ashkenaz in the beginning of the 19th century. One was named Port, and another one was in Würzburg. So he was learning in Würzburg. What was important about the yeshiva in Würzburg? There was also a university there which was willing to accept Jews, which was obviously nice of them. So he learned in the yeshiva, and he was planning on doing his PhD in the university. And why did he want a PhD? Because everyone with eyes in his head could already see that if you want to be a rabbi in Germany, you'd need a doctorate. And that is for 2 reasons. Because of the government, that was part of the conditions of the government in Germany. That's a police state. I apologize, but I think to this day, but certainly in those days, that mean you couldn't become a rabbi without having a confirmation from the state that it would not fly. So, and part of their conditions, I think for understandable reasons, because they wanted to Germanize the Jews as well as they could. So they would like the rabbi to be not some fellow from a yeshiva. They would want him to be with a PhD. So he, because of the government, but also because of the Balei Batim. The Balei Batim, not that the Balei Batim were PhDs themselves, but they knew that something chashuv is someone that went out of university. That gives you a stempel, right? You're a chashuv person. No, not matter if you can really speak or not, or if you know something or not, but if you have then paper, that's the way it works. So to this day. So if you have the paper, then that means you're a chashuv. So he is attending the university there. Now, he didn't even manage to get what the equivalent of today's B. It didn't really work with BA back then, but it didn't really had even a chance to get there, because in 1819 there are pogroms named the HEPEP, exactly, the HEPEP pogroms. Now, no one really knows what is the origin of the name HEP, and but these were the cries that the pogromers, that is the name, right? So the guys doing the pogroms would shout while obviously abusing, killing, and running after Jews. So Würzburg was the first city to be hit. It was something that hit almost all of the North Germany, but Würzburg was the first one to be hit, and he is running away. And now, if you wanted, he could have returned later or could have completed his degrees in a different university, but it seems he had enough from the non-Jews. And he was, I don't think that he was very much illusion to begin with. Obviously, he was doing the college completely lo lishma. Meaning he did it because he thought it would be important for him as a rabbi, as a mechanech for the next generation. But after the pogroms, he really was completely, he was sore. He didn't really want to see anything of these people ever again. So he is running away to Fjord, and there is continuing his learning. In 1826, he is getting a position in Mannheim. Now, that is not a big Jewish place. There are some Jews there, it's not really big, but what was important is that he was able to secure from the community there that they would finance his yeshiva, so that he would be able to open a yeshiva. That was very important. He was one of the early ones. And by the way, the Ashkenazi, the Germanic Jews, with everything that can be said against what was happening later in Germany, one thing the rabbis really got, and much quicker than all the other rabbis, I may say, in the world, and that is that if you want to fight modernity, there is only way in which, or I don't know, adapt to life in the modern world, then one of the best and maybe only ways that you can manage is by building a good education system. And for us, it seems very clear, of course, Jewish day schools and Jewish high schools and Jewish yeshiva, that seems to be, obvious. It was not obvious. It was not obvious. Most of the Jews, I'm not speaking about women, which was completely out of the question, but even for men, okay, you'd go to the Cheder for 4 years, you'd know how to learn from the Siddur. If you are really talented, you'd continue for another year or two, and you'd be able to illusion yourself that you can read the Daf Gemara. And that was it. That was who can afford more. But that left you almost completely undefended, because you really knew nothing. And you just relied on mimicking what you saw at your parents' home, which is very nice as long as the society is traditional. But when society is not traditional anymore, and when the environment is that you are allowed to be critical, and maybe even encouraged to be critical regarding anything old, because the old should be thrown away, and new things are the right things, and the world belongs to the young, etc., etc., etc. And these are not new slogans. These are, we are already well after the first wave of enlightenment. So yes, the enlightenment is the courage to believe in yourself and to check for yourself and not to rely on what was said by earlier generations. So traditionality is not working anymore. And mimetic Judaism is not working anymore. And if you would not educate the children, then they are unvaccinated. And they would be, and that's what happened. They would be swept away by the new currents of the new world, the new brave world, if you want. And that's what happened. But both Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger and Rabbi Ilzheimer and Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, they really understood the importance of mass education. And they opened what we would call today schools. Obviously, it was not the same institution as we know today, but they were doing their best with the means they had. And we are more developed in these. We have the advancement of 200 years more, but they were doing their best in order to develop the education there, and that was also what Rav Ettlinger understood. So that was his first condition: the community must finance his yeshiva. And one of the students in yeshiva, only for 1 year, but for a very important year, was no other than Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, who later remained in contact with Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger throughout the rest of his life. As I said, Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger is a very transitional and important figure in this sense. 10 years after being in Mannheim, he is moving to Altona. Now, Altona, I think we spoke already about the communities of Ahu, that is Altona, Hamburg, and Vandenberg, which were cities that were very much close by, but were belonging to different countries, Denmark and Germany, and there were different laws in each one of these countries. It was a very strange situation, but they decided that they would have one rabbi for all three communities. I think I already said you can be doreshit leshevach and you can doreshit lignai. You can say, you are right, we want the best rabbi we can have, so we would all unite together and then we'd have a strong and important rabbi. Or we would have a rabbi that have to skip between the different cities, and that's why he would only be with us only one in 3 weeks. So there are two ways to see it. Now, there were very important rabbis that served as rabbis in Ahu. We spoke about them. This would be the Chacham Tzvi and the Yavetz, his son, and Rabbi Yonatan Eibschitz. And also now Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger coming to the city, and he made his permanent place in Altona. Why? Altona belonged to Denmark. Now, nowadays, Altona is part of Hamburg. There is no independent city of Altona. But back then, Altona was an independent city that belonged to Denmark. And Denmark was one step behind Germany, or maybe forward for, I don't know how do you want to say it. It was more liberal to the Jews on one hand. So there were less laws that were regicide against the Jews. On the other hand, it still led the Jews to have their autonomous coercive community, which we may hear the words coercive and be maybe a little taken aback. But back then it was considered a great benefit that if a Jew opened the store on Shabbat, then the community can punish him. And not only that it can punish him, the police, the city police would apply the punishment. So they would go on the laws of the city, the laws of the state, enforce, that was the word I was looking for. The police would enforce the psika, the law of the Beit Din that was according to the law, because the Jewish community was autonomous. So that was something that was seen by, obviously, as a great benefit by traditional people, as Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, and that was not existing anymore in the Germanic states. So he preferred sitting in Altona. Now, reform is beginning to raise its head. Now, we have to understand, secularism, meaning people just being not from, that is a phenomena that is not modern in any way. That was always had been the case, that some of the Jews would keep more mitzvot, some of them would keep less mitzvot, and some of them very, very less mitzvot. Right? So that is not something new. The numbers obviously are different, but having Jews that do not conform to halacha, that is not a new phenomenon. Reform is a very modern phenomenon. These are Jews that are not only saying we are not able or not even interested to keep all of the mitzvot, they say we do not think that the mitzvot are obligating anymore. And we are going to set our new laws and new mitzvot and what Yahadut means and what halacha means, if it means anything. And that is beginning to form. And reform is beginning to form in Germany of the time. So in 1844, in Braunschweig, there is a big gathering of reform rabbis. Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger is the great defender of faith, we may say, or if you want to put him on the offensive, then he's the great critic of this reform movement. And he is arranging 160 rabbis. I don't know why 116 rabbis was. I don't know if it's just there's a number he was able to gather, or if the number is meaning anything. But 116 rabbis that signed like a pamphlet against reform. Now again, for us, what does it mean even, right? So yes, I am against reform. That's mean what is new here. But back then, it is not so clear. Because you have rabbis, and there is one rabbi that thinks A, and another rabbi that thinks B. And that was usually the case. And you would not excommunicate someone or say that he's not a rabbi just because he's a different opinion from you, right? But here, Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger says, no, that's beyond the pale. Right? That is something that is out of the boundaries. Taking Tzion, we'll speak about it in a few minutes, but taking Tzion out of the Siddur, stop speaking about redemption because we are redeemed. We lived in modern Germany, so we are redeemed, right? That's what the Reform was standing for. And obviously, no korbanot, who is crazy, right? To shachten animals. And also in shul, it would be so nice if you'd have an organ during the Shabbat services. And also, why do you need so many services? And also, why do you need to read so much of the Torah? And why in Hebrew? That is an ununderstandable language. So many reforms are being introduced by these reform rabbis. And Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger is not the only one, but in Germany he is the leading figure. He is gathering other rabbis and mobilizing them, I think we can say, against this reform movement. As part of this action against the reform movement, he is creating something completely new, and that is the Orthodox newspaper. Now, because the Orthodox are Orthodox, meaning they are traditional, they are old school. That's the per definition, right? That Orthodox are old school. So they are always late to the game. That's part of being Orthodox, is being late. That's why we began our shiur 12 late. That's late. Because that's part of being, you are late. You are not progressive. You are degressive. And so you are late. And everyone else is already printing newspapers, and that's one of the ways to educate the masses. And Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger says, wait a minute, why won't we use the same method? So he begins to print a newspaper called, in Hebrew, it's called Shomer Tzion HaNe'eman. Right? Now, the German name is, please help me. The Treuer Zion Wächter. Right? Shomer Tzion HaNe'eman. Yeah, you can hear the English here. The true Zion watcher. Right? And that become now and not only that he's doing a newspaper, a weekly newspaper, it's also in German, not in Yiddish. Yiddish is out. Even he has to admit, even the old schooler has to admit that Yiddish does not work anymore with the new generation because they hear Yiddish and they cringe. They understand Yiddish. They understand it perfectly. They don't want to use it because it is being seen as some kind of deformed German. So it is obtrusive. It's a pogani. It's like it's offending the patriotic German feelings. To use, I cannot but being cynical because we all know the history afterwards, and these patriotic feelings that they had towards Germany, to me, it's completely twisted. I don't see any way to align it with anything that happened. But these were true and sincere feelings back then. Jews really felt that Germany is their home. And they were Germans more or less in Mosaic tradition. So they saw, not Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, I no one to be confused, but the people that he was speaking to. And he understood, if I would continue to speak Yiddish, I'm speaking to nobody. If someone is hearing me, I am already preaching to the converted. If I want to approach the new generation, I must adapt the new means. And the new mean is a newspaper. I mean, you cannot write with Rashi script 2 columns in a sefer. It's not working anymore. Just not working. No one reads Sefarim. They read newspapers. Right? Nowadays, no one reads newspapers. Right? If you want to be exactly. You have to be on the screens. That's what we are doing here, right? We have to be on the screens. So things are changing. Now, it's difficult sometimes for people to change. For example, I cannot write a Facebook column. I cannot. There are people, rabbis, that are doing great job in putting great ideas into one. How many letters are you allowed to use in Twitter? Like 200. So I don't know how to say shalom in 200 letters. I don't know. It takes me just to warm my engines. I need half of a page. But fine. But if there are rebels, I think it's great. I think it's important. I think it's also important to understand that that's only the hook. If you think that you read an idea that is in 200 letters and you think you got something that is deep and meaningful, then you are wrong. You are wrong, because people do not change by 200 letters. But 200 letters can be something that would draw you in. And when you are in, then the game begins. So I think it's very important. Okay, returning to our subject, leaving Facebook aside or Twitter aside, I'm sure that even speaking about Twitter now makes me an old schooler, because I don't know, but I'm sure that people are now sending divrei Torah in Instagram somehow.
Army myself, that like from a rabbi, there was a maximum of very few words, but it was like, wow.
Wow, short and sweet. Yeah, okay, so that's an art. That's an art. You need to have the skill. So he is writing a newspaper. Now in the newspaper, you're still writing. Back then, newspapers did not have half of a page of a picture and then a caption. Nowadays, our newspapers, if they look like what used to be newspaper for children, right? With huge pictures and small captions beneath. But back then, they still had the attention span that at least allowed them to read for half an hour. So you could write a column, right? Or a page or 2 pages. Without pictures, and so he wrote it, and it's in German. It's in Gothic letters. The whole thing is online. You can see. I obviously I cannot read any words, but in Gothic letters. Now, some people requested that there would also be an add-on in Hebrew. So he accepted the request. And from there on, I cannot remember the ratio. I think it was every week it was German, but once every 2 weeks it was also Hebrew. I mean, there was some ratio that I cannot recall right now. I don't think it's very important, but it was dual in a way, dual language, both German and Hebrew, and that was the true Zion Observer. We may say that's the first Observer as a Jewish newspaper. Now, it was extremely important. I cannot read the German. Some of it was translated a few years ago. There was some guy, I think, named Horowitz. As you can hear, he was also an Ashkenazi good Jew. And I don't know, maybe he's a descendant of Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger, or just took an interest in him. And he translated some of the drashot, that the sermons that Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger wrote in German, and the ideas and the words, and he put them into a Hebrew form. I don't have the sefer, so I have nothing to say about it. I'm sure it's interesting, but I didn't see it. Now, he published more than 200 of these newspapers during 10 years. So I guess it was less than once a week. It should be once a month. It was a monthly period. Now, people wrote letters. He published also the letters. So it became a very important, interesting newspaper or periodic for the Orthodox crowd. And it was supposed to strengthen those that are in and draw as much as you can, be mekarev from outside. But let's admit it, they were playing defense back then, and not very good defense. Everything was leaking. They were blooding, and even hemorrhage, I think that's the real word. All right, so it was very, very difficult. Now, we are not in any position to judge them. Nowadays, Orthodox is in the march. But that's not because we are so good, but because, there are trends, things are changing. But back then, they were on the losing side, and for 200 years, they would be on the losing side. So it's 150. So there is still a long way to the bottom in his time, and it's very, very difficult. It's very difficult because you have to adapt to these new times. As we said, for Orthodox, for the old school, it's very difficult to adapt because it's part of your DNA, not to adapt, to reject changes. And here you need to reject some and accept some. It's very difficult. It's very difficult, and all the time you are losing people. All the time you're losing people. And he is trying to play a very complicated game. On one hand, he is not shy of attacking the reform. As I said, he was mobilizing rabbis against them. So look at source Aleph, that's from his book of Drashot named Mנחat Ani. That's from Parshat Pנחas. So obviously Parshat Pנחas, you are speaking about Kanaut, right? About fanaticism, we may say. Zealotry. And he says there, Al yimana הלוחם מלחמת השם נגד המינים. So if you are waging the wars of God against the heretics, do not be stopped by the false argument על ידי הטענה הכוזבת שגדול השלום, that peace is greater. No, peace is not greater. You need to fight against the heretics, and obviously the heretic here is a code name for the reform. I think that's not a question. וטוב לחזוק בהתחברות כל אשר בשם ישראל יכונה מלעשות. So people say, no, let's connect with all the Jews. אל יניח האדם להחזיק בתורה. That must not lessen your hands, weaken your hand from holding the Torah, this type of arguments. מפני הטענה הכוזבת, for the wrong argument, שאין להתנגד לטובת חברת בני אדם. The social good is always better. No, sometimes you need to separate yourself and be faithful to what you believe in. והטעם בזה, this is the reason is, שאף שגדול השלום בין אדם לחברו. Obviously I believe that the peace is a great value. Peace is great value that we need to attain to. עם כל זה יותר טוב השלום שבין ישראל לאביהם שבשמיים. But there is an even greater value. And that is the peace that between עם ישראל and God in heaven. ולכן מי שמקנה קנאת השם להחזיק התורה, הוא החפץ בשלום. He says the real peace seeker is looking to enhance or to improve the peace that between Am Israel and God, and so he would fight the heretics in order to improve the relationship between the Jewish nation and the Creator. That's basically his argument here. So we see that he is not shy. He says, I am not happy, but if there is a need for waging wars, I am not afraid from doing so. On the other hand, there is a very interesting letter. It's an amazing book named Igrot Sofrim. Igrot Sofrim, which means the letters of the scribes. But what is really means, there are two very important families. We spoke about the Khatam Sofer. It's one of them we didn't speak, which is shameful of me, that we didn't speak about Rabbi Akiva Eiger. He somehow fell in between the 18th century and the 19th century because he lived in both of them, so I somehow missed him, which is a problem. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger was an extremely important rabbi in Posen. So that would be Germany, but he is also connected to Hungary. So both of them, Khatam Sofer and Rabbi Akiva Eiger, were fighting against the nascent reform in their time. And both of them were the fathers to very important families each one of them has offsprings, children that became great rabbis by themselves, and they were also married to each other. So one of the children, named Reb Shlomo Iger, put a sefer in which he records many of the letters that went between the families and to other people that he found interesting. That is named Igrot Sofrim, Eiger, Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and Sofer, Khatam Sofer. So Schreiber is a Sofer, scribe. So that is Igrot Sofrim, a very interesting sefer. And one of the letters is describing how he met with Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger. He was trying to create a group response, an orthodox, metoam, synchronized response to reform. And so from different international response, so from Hungary and Germany, etc. And he met with Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger. What Reb Shlomo Iger wanted to have is a complete excommunication of all Reformed Jews, meaning you have to separate the communities. We know that it happened in Hungary later, and it happened in Germany by Reb Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. But Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger was opposed. So it's very interesting. We read a minute earlier that he was all in for polemics and writing letters and arguing. But when he was asked to ban them and to completely separate, he opposed. Now, we have his reasons. It's not by himself, but the way it's Reb Shlomo Iger recording his reasons. So that's we have to take it into account, but it's still very, very interesting. So look at source bit. אחרי אשר הראיתי לפני, so he said, I summoned all the rabbis and I showed them my פסק דין, that נגזר עליהם בתורתנו הקדושה להבדילה מישראל, כי לא לישראל יחשבו לשום דבר. So he says, you must announce the Reform Jews as non-Jews. הנה, אף כי הוכרחו להודות לדבר הזה להלכה. So they agreed with me on principle, he says. Now again, did they agree or not agree? That's a question. I mean, he's saying that everyone agreed to him principally. They may have said it's a nice letter, right? It doesn't really mean that they agreed on principle. So I'm putting that in a question mark. But they לא נרצו לעשות מעשה. They didn't agree to act upon my פסק הלכה. Why? כי הגאון of בית דין קודש די אלטונה. This is the רבי יעקב אטלינגר. עם כל חסידותו. So although he said he was a pious, it's not that he was חס וחלילה a supporter of reform, ועם כל המעשה אשר נעשה על ידו לגנות מעשה הסוררים האלה בכתבי שומר ציון, דוקטור ענח. So he says, and although he was all in to לגנות, condemn the acts of reform, יראו לעשות מעשה כזה בפועל. He was afraid. That's again, the way that it's being framed by Reb Shlomo Iger, that Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger was afraid of banning and excommunicating and separating from the reform. Why? ברשעים המושלים עליו, because these wicked men are governing him. כי עד כה יכבדו וינסו כדרך אנשי אשכנז, אף כי רוב הגבירים אנשי מדהבה, רוח מינות נוססה בקרבם, לא ירהבו נער בזקן שקנה חוכמת התורה, ונוהג רבנותו כמלפנים. על כן לא ישנו דבר קטן או גדול בבתי כנסיות באלטונה והמבורג, שלא ברשות הרבנים. He says, you see, they are all, in truth, the people of Altona and Hamburg, they are reformed. In the heart, they are non-believers. But it's Ashkenaz. It's the place of minhagim. Even if you do not believe in anything, you still sing the same tune, right, that your grandfather sang. That's the way it works, even if you believe in nothing. So Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger says, we still have them in our shoes. If you would separate from them, then they are lost. So I can scorch them from the bima, from the pulpit, right? I would still speak very strongly against reform, but I wouldn't push them with both my hands outside. Because if I'm doing that, then we are not bettering our position, we are losing. Now, that's a very, we can all understand. That's the question always of, do you keep them inside and risking your own children maybe, and risking the next generation, risking many, many things, but keeping them meaning the heretics, in the fold, in field? Or are you segregating? Are you closing yourself? That is very safe, that is very secure, but you may be just raising hands regarding 80%, 85%, we know the numbers, 90% of Jewish population. And it's very difficult to make the call because no one knows what would be in the next generation. So it's a bet anyway, because maybe you think, I mean, you know, they say that the mouse was, when the cat came to eat it, when it was eating the cheese, then the mouse said, I can still make an influence from inside. Right? So I would stay with the cheese. So it's a very risky argument to say, let's keep our influence, because you may, if you are in a very small minority, you may find yourself not as the one giving influence, but as the one that is taking influence in. There is no easy answer to these type of questions. Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger believed that he can still ride the wave. We know that Rabbi Zri Leitzheimer also thought that you can ride the waves, his student, but his other student, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael, thought that there is no way but separation. In Hungary, you had the same question. There were the separating communities, and there were the status quo communities, in which the Reform neologues, they were called there, and the Orthodox stayed in the same community. we can say that to this day, right, here in Eretz Israel, you have the more Haredi community who believed in segregation. They believed that they should be fenced and walled against the influence of modern society. And you have the more, what is called today, Dati Leumi or modern Orthodox society, who believed that they can integrate and they can benefit from the modern world and they can influence the modern world and the general society. Who is right? How can you even, I don't know how to judge it. I know where I am, I know what I believe in, but I do not say that I have the truth in my pocket. I don't know. I mean, we see the dangers, we see them happening, see them happening. It's unfortunately. So it's a difficult question, it's a difficult court, and Rabbi Yaacov Ettlinger didn't believe that he should excommunicate the reform, at least not in his own time. Okay. So that's the type of game, we may say, and the balance that he was trying to maintain. Now, things were changing. Even in Denmark, things were changing. And in 1863, the government is taking from him his ability to coerce and to have the autonomous community that he had up till there. Now, it comes, obviously, with a candy. With a carrot. The carrot is emancipation. But as is well known already in his time, emancipation is very good for the Jews, but unfortunate for Judaism. Because when you give emancipation, you break the last walls that were separating artificially between the Jews and the outer society, and now you are really on your own. Meaning, you only have the base of positive why you want to be a Jew. And if there are not enough positive reasons, then you can just drift. And there are no consequences. The community cannot punish you for not keeping Torah, for not keeping mitzvot, for completely assimilating. And as I said, because education was lacking, that was a very real problem. And that was part of the cheshbon, the calculation that the Gentiles governments were doing. They not always gave emancipation to the Jews because they were so much of Jews lovers, but because they believed, and many times they justified so, that emancipation would weaken the obligation that the Jews felt to the Jewishness. So, but he was unable to stop it. These were trends that were much beyond a certain city in Denmark. So he was unable to stop that. That was in 1863. Now he wrote many sefarim, drashot that we quoted earlier, pirushim on the Shas, as I said, are being learned to this day. The Aruch Laner is being learned to this very day on certain Masechtot on the Shas. He took the Masechtot that were not given adequate commentary, at least to his own eyes, till his time, and wrote a very thorough commentary on them. He wrote responsa. Now his responsa is called Binyan Sion. Why Binyan Sion? Because many of his shuvot, not all of them, but many of them are taken from the newspaper. He was asked questions and he would write and rabbis would respond, and he took these shuvot and he edited them into his Binyan Sion. Fascinating questions. Also, some of them were, he was very, again, it's anachronistic, but he was a Zionist. So he was supportive of the Jewish settlement in Eretz Israel. He collected money for them, he pasken shuvot for them. Many of his children and his chatanim were later big machers, not necessarily great rabbis, but big machers in the Mizrahi movement, which is also very interesting. And that's why Musad Rav Kook is into some of his publications. So that's also very interesting. I think it's part of him being Shomer Tzion Neiman. He saw that as part of his war against the reform. So if they are abandoning Zion, then obviously the right thing is to cling to Zion. So I mean, I don't know, maybe that's somewhat of a counter description, but I think it's part of that. He was given the title Nesi Eretz Israel, both from the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic rabbis of Yerushalayim. So you see, but he was a great gadol. Just maybe we can speak about some of his shuvot as we finish the shiur. So as I said, it's fascinating. His book is fascinating. He's written very clearly. So it's a very easy read. Again, it's easy. Obviously, it's a rabbinic book, but it's an easy read on the league of rabbinic books. So I'm wondering. I printed so many of these shivot here, and all of them are fascinating. So some of them are very simple. He was asked if you are drinking water from certain health springs in Germany. So do you need to make a birkat shehakol because you are not supposed to enjoy the drink? You only drink as a medicine. So that's a simple answer and a simple question. And he said it depends. If these are bitter water, right, with this sulfate smell, then you do not make a bracha. If it's also, even if it's a simple water without taste, and you only drink it not because you are thirsty, but because of a medicine, then you don't make a bracha. But if these are mineral waters and they are tasty, even if you drink them only for the purpose of medicine, you still need to make a bracha. That is the basis for our halacha today. If you are taking a pill, you do not make a bracha. If you are taking even a syrup, but it's bitter and you only drink for the sake of medicine, you do not make a bracha. But if it's sweet syrup, then you need to make a bracha on it. So that's an halacha that we, as I said, many halachot are being taught by the Binyan Zion, by the Aruch by our hero, Yaacov Ettlinger. Another question, which is unfortunately, it's not necessarily part of the modern world, but it's very unfortunate. He was asked, and it happens. He was asked by a certain family. So there was a husband and the woman. The husband went to a business trip, and the woman stayed at home. And she was a very naive and simple woman, as it happens. And one day, a beggar knocks on the door, and he is asking to be hosted for the night. She let him stay. She was a tzaddiket, and she let him stay. And at night, she sees he's sitting and he's learning, and he's not eating, he's not drinking. He's such a tzaddik. And she asks him, and she sees that he's speaking with someone. She cannot see anyone, so she asks him, "Who do you speak with?" And he says, I wanted to keep it in secret from you, but now that you saw, I must tell you that I am speaking with Eliyahu Hanavi. And Eliyahu Hanavi told me that you are such a tzaddiket woman that your offspring should be the Mashiach. Unfortunately, your husband is not worthy, and that's why the Mashiach was not yet born from you. But Eliyahu Hanavi told me that for the sake of being the Mashiach, then we should be together. Now, she was, as I said, she was a naive woman. I mean, she's called stupid later in the tshuva, and I have to admit that I didn't know her, but it's very difficult to escape this conclusion. So she is accepting his words, and you understand what happened. And when the husband is, she was really stupid. He told her the sign that I spoke right to you 3 days after I am gone, you'd open this. Do not open it before, but 3 days after I am gone, you'd open the box here, and it would be full of gold. Great, gold. No, okay. So she's not opening it, and her husband is returning, and she says to him, Baruch Hashem, you returned. Tomorrow you would see that this box is full of gold. Okay, so he's not complaining. Tomorrow she's opening the box, as you can understand, nothing in the box, and then she tells the husband the whole story because obviously there was some mistake, and now they ask the rabbi, should they divorce?
Wow.
Should they divorce? Now, I mean, you would believe that maybe uneducated women from 200 years ago would do so, but unfortunately, we have a very similar event a few years ago. I don't know if I don't want to expand right now, but in the north. A very, very similar case in which a certain rabbi that was known as a Mekubal, you can understand this type of Mekubalim take distance. And also he was able to convince some women, not one woman, but a few women, that he was told by Ruach HaKodesh that he should be with them. And he was, the Binyan Zion was, he decided that it could be seen as a rape, as an oinus, although she do it by willingness, but because she didn't understand anything, then maybe it can be seen as oinus. He said, I don't want to be matir only by myself, but if two great rabbis would join, then they are allowed to remain together, the husband and the wife. And this tshuva is being utilized, as I said, to this day. So again, very fascinating, interesting tshuva. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the modern world. It's a fascinating tshuva. Tshuva there has more to do with, as I said, the very strange times in which Rabbi Yaakov Ettlinger lived. So just for example, in source Daled. So I was asked by someone that needed to build a house. Why? To get a permission from the government to marry a woman. So again, different draconian decrees against the Jews. One of them that you are not allowed to marry unless you already have a house, because as we all know, the Jews are parasites. So if you want to be sure that he would, at least he would have his own home, then they must first build their own. Now, obviously, it was all of that were ways to make the Jews that go away. Now he wanted to build a home, but the problem was that the only place that he could build a home in, there were fruit trees. So are you allowed to cut the fruit trees? A very interesting answer. As you can imagine, in the end, he says, if you are unable to do it in a way by a non-Jew, you can also do it yourself, because the mitzvah of marrying a woman and having children is overcoming the problem of cutting off fruit trees. Another interesting question. What is considered a mechalel Shabbat befarhesia? Now, this is a question of modern times, because there are different laws that apply to someone that is so careless that he is willing to discredit the Shabbat publicly. But what is publicly? You need 10 people. Now, these 10 people should be men, women. They should all see him decreting the Shabbat together, or it can also be one after the other. Is it regarded publicly if the witnesses themselves, the 10 themselves, are also being Mechalel Shabbos? So he's dealing with that, and basically his answer is that if there are 10 Jews there, regardless of who are they, men, women, from, non-from, then that is Mechalel Shabbat publicly. And that is based upon certain halachot, which we cannot go into, but that's a very interesting answer. Another question, magnetism. So before 1863, he could punish them. After 1863, he can, I don't know, give drasha in shul. In another question about magnetism. Magnetism is hypnotism, right? They call it magnetism back then. So are you allowed to be treated in hypnotism? Or should it be seen as a type of kishuf, of sorcery? So he says, you know, if it works, he says, I don't know if it works. He said, I spoke with a few doctors, so there are different opinions. If you believe it works, then it's no different than other medicines we do not know how they work. It doesn't mean that it's witchery. It only means that we do not know what are the natural causes. But it's not sorcery. So he gives a permission to be treated by how do you say hypnosis? Thank you, hypnosis. Another interesting question. We'll finish with that. A very known one. Are you allowed to drink wine that was handled by a non-observant Jew? So a very poignant question. And he is, you know, he's quibbling for and back. He says, obviously, you should try to avoid the situation, use cook wine, mevushal, or something else. If there is no other choice, he says, in our time and age, he says, I offer, meaning it doesn't give it as a psak, but it was later adopted. I don't give it as a psak, but I think we should see the non-observant Jews of our times as what we say in halacha, tinok shenishba, like a baby that was captured, the Jewish baby that was captured by the non-Jews and was raised as a non-Jew, that it didn't have a choice. Now, it is a very great leap, because the Jews were not captured to the non-Jews. I mean, some of them were educated by their parents, which were from. But it is in our days and times, it is, and here you see some of, what can I say? Maybe I don't think that he was ever completely disdained, but he said, you know, our tools are non-adequate, and it's almost an onus. Right, it's almost by force that these young Jews are living the faith. So we can maybe judge them as babies that were captured and did not get good education. Now here you see both the problem, but also already the solution that needs to be applied. Give good education, do not let them be captured. But that's basically what he's trying to suggest. Then it was later adapted and developed by none other than the great Chazon Ish. And I think to this day, people, if there is no, again, it is better to use cooked wine or something like that and avoid the situation. But in a case in which it cannot be avoided, then people do rely on this chidush, on this halacha of the Binyan Zion. There is much more. He was niftar passed in when he was 73. That is 1871. In his last will, he said, "I really wanted to be buried in Eretz Israel. Unfortunately, I was not zoche to, I was not able to. But however, he made sure to get. He was the Nesi HaKavod, right, of Israel. So he asked that a whole aron, casket of sand from Eretz Israel, afar Eretz Israel, would be brought to Altona. So they imported the whole casket of afar Eretz Israel, and he was buried completely in the sand of Eretz Israel, which was in a way it was a part fulfillation of his dream to come to Eretz Israel. And I would finish in a chidush, very interesting chidush he has in Masechet Sukkah. You know that there is a machloket between the Rishonim. Would the third temple be built by us, or would it go down from heaven, built on fire? And he said both are correct. We need to build it. But just as there is a human body, but in the neshama coming from up heaven, so we would build the materials, but then there would be fire coming down from heaven and animating the Beit HaMikdash. So Be'ezrat Hashem, this vision of his should be fulfilled. And I think that it's a very inspirational figure for all of us. Thank you. And we would continue Be'ezrat Hashem next week.
Thank you, Rav.
Thank you. Bye.